Did you ever wonder about the consequences of your consumption habits? The more you have, the happier you will be, is the message we are constantly told. However, our current unsustainable make, use, waste model is causing a severe impact on both people and the environment. The recent economic growth in Asia has lifted many countries out of poverty, but it has also created a large number of new consumers, with plastics having made their way to nearly every aspect of our lives. Global plastic use has increased 20 times as much in the past 50 years and is expected to double in the next 20 years. Worldwide, we are already producing about 300 million tons of plastic waste every year. Even if citizens in developed economies are using about 20 times more plastics per person than in Asian developing countries, in Asia, plastics have become a major concern, threatening the safety and quality of our health and food, negatively impacting our ecosystems and contributing to climate change. It is time to change. We should do our best to eliminate the use of plastics, especially single-use plastics. In a new circular economy, plastics waste can be used to produce new goods. In this way, we limit the quantity of plastics that is being generated. Governments should take strong action, promoting higher standards and innovative and available alternatives to plastics. Businesses must innovate and design plastics that can be safely reused, recycled, remanufactured, or composted. Consumers must circulate all the plastic items they use and keep them in the economy and out of the environment. The European Commission launched in 2018 its European Strategy for Plastics in a Circular Economy, a directive on single use of plastics in 2019, and its new Circular Economy Action Plan in 2020 as part of its commitments within the EU Green Deal. The EU is also supporting the participation of its partner countries around the world to the Global Agreement on Plastics. Waste and plastics are two building blocks to push forward the transition towards a green economy. Since 2007, the Switch Asia program has implemented several grant projects promoting responsible supply chains and business practices, contributing to waste management and plastics in South Asia, Southeast Asia, and East Asia. The program is also providing policy support to Pakistan and Maldives on waste and plastics management, and to Lao PDR on minimizing, reducing, and preventing single-use plastics. These issues are universal, and they touch every person on the planet. Play your part. Rethink, reduce, reuse, recycle. Each one of us can make a difference. It is our common and shared responsibility.
Blue Resources Trust is a Sri Lankan NGO. We started work in 2016. Primary areas of focus are coral reef conservation and elasmobranch fisheries. We also help the government with policy work and MPA management. So since we started our fisheries project, we have surveyed nearly 20 harbours and landing sites all across the country. What we've done for the last 3 years is focus more on data collection from the lesser known and smaller landing sites because very little to no data exists from these sites. When we go to the fish market, we take photos to know what species are being landed We take measurements of those specimens that are landed. We also take DNA samples from the specimens at the fish markets. Since August of 2017, we've documented 13,000 specimens consisting of 40 species of rays and 43 species of sharks. From these specimens, we have collected over 3,000 DNA samples. The reason we study sharks and rays is because these animals are very vulnerable to overfishing. Unlike other fish, their life cycle and life histories resemble land animals like elephants and leopards more than fish like tuna. Most sharks and rays live for a long time. They have very few young. They reproduce only once every few years. All of this makes them very vulnerable to overfishing. There are many different fishing methods used in Sri Lanka depending on the size of the boat and the weather. While there are a few targeted shark and ray fisheries, most of them are bycatch in the long line and the gillnet fisheries of Sri Lanka. Although shark and ray meat is consumed in Sri Lanka, it's not very valuable. The biggest value from the shark and ray fishery comes from the export of the shark fins and the gill plates of molluscs. These species are apex predators, and protecting them is vital to maintaining a healthy ecosystem. In the end, all fisheries rely on a healthy ecosystem in the ocean.
The ocean. Our island is surrounded by it. We live in the midst of it. Mesmerizing. Enthralling. Pleasing. Our ocean is unique, a vibrant marine habitat. We have loyal whales who never leave our seas. Turtles who always return to our shorelines. Mangroves sequestering carbon. Dugongs gliding beneath the waves. Seagrass meadows pumping oxygen we breathe. Underwater reefs sheltering marine life. But they're struggling. Coral reefs bleached. Our seabeds scraped over by foreign fishing trawlers. We're depleting our marine life through overfishing. Plastic and chemical waste pollution gush into our oceans. Coastal sand is disappearing. Marine animals killed by dynamite. Turtles entangling in Ghostnets. Ships colliding with whales. Climate change. Global warming. Oil spills. Coastal construction. Ocean acidification. Ocean's life is draining. We need the ocean. Our survival depends on it. The sea around us is now a hotspot for geopolitics, trade, security, maritime ventures, and crime.
Our impact on the ocean matters. Our ocean is our lungs, our hearts, our nerves. Without it, no one can survive. We can only thrive if our oceans survive. Let's strive to be the guardians of the ocean. Let us be the protectors, together, for our ocean.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Daniel Fernando, and I'm the co-founder of Blue Resources Trust. I would like to welcome you all to the World Oceans Day Summit, where today's session is on the future of fisheries and aquaculture under the theme of an ocean-based resource economy. The World Oceans Day Summit is hosted by the Pearl Protectors in partnership with the Marine Environment Protection Authority, Blue Resources Trust, and the World Ocean Day Organization. And this summit intends to delve into the aspects of the ocean around Sri Lanka, while highlighting key challenges, opportunities, and of course, inspiring Sri Lankans to love and care for our marine environment. You can learn more about the summit on pearlprotector.org. The topic of this session is the future of fisheries and aquaculture. And this is extremely relevant as fisheries are probably imposing one of the greatest impacts on our marine environment. And at the same time, it's essential for millions of coastal communities across the world as a source of income, and for even millions more as a source of protein. This session will explore marine fisheries and aquaculture, which is of course the farming of fish, shellfish, and other marine species in controlled conditions. And we will explore the current status, future opportunities, and learn where our Sri Lankan fisheries and aquaculture industry are heading. We have some great guests today to talk on this topic. I have the great pleasure of introducing you to Imali Manikarachchi, a lecturer in ocean management and governance and marine environmental law and policies. Welcome. We also have with us Ishara Rathnasuriya, a lecturer in aquaculture and fisheries. Both our esteemed guests are from the Faculty of Fisheries and Ocean Sciences at the Ocean University of Sri Lanka, and I thank you both for joining us today. We will also try to answer the most relevant and interesting questions from our audience towards the end of this session, and I kindly request all of you to add your questions to the comment section, either on Facebook or YouTube. So without further ado, I would like to start off, and I would like to kick off our session with a question to you, Ishara. Fisheries across the world utilize many different types of fishing gear. But would you care to elaborate on the most common methods used in the Indian Ocean, and specifically for Sri Lanka? And also tell us a bit about the scale of our fisheries. Are they large or small?
Yeah, thank you, Daniel, for nice introduction, and good evening to you all. So when we talk about the Indian Ocean fisheries, we know about basically it's targeting large-scale migratory species like tuna, billfish, and the sharks. Then again, it has diverse small-scale fisheries activities all along the developed countries' coast. So when we think about the fishing gears, mainly we have long lines in the Indian Ocean, especially targeting on the yellowfin, big guy, and swordfish and other fish species. Again, we have gillnet fishery from different small state islands from Indian Ocean like Iran, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, especially targeting the tuna and Neritic tuna species. Then again, since 1980s, the large-scale persins came from the different EU Union countries, basically from the France, then again from the Spain, under the flag state of the, I think, Seychelles and their own island countries based on the Indian Ocean. So when consider about the Sri Lankan content, we are continuously producing good catch in consistent with the world production according to the fisheries. Then again, we are also utilizing number of fishing techniques in the small scale fisheries compared to the offshore fisheries activities. Those are mainly the gill net activities, all along the coast. We are targeting seasonal, high diverse, small scale fisheries around the coastal areas. Then again, long line activities. Apart to that, we have some troll grounds around the country, especially there are 3 troll grounds, Colombo, then Kalpiti, and then Northwestern Coastal Province. Then again, there are some small scale per scene activities, but it's not like the industrial scale. Those are very small, tiny scale encircling fishing activities which are targeting neritic tunas, then small pelagics as well.
Thank you for that. That's really interesting, and it's quite evident that there are a lot of different types of fishing gear utilized both in our coastal and offshore waters. But these are, of course, all the legal fisheries that we're having in the country. But we know that, unfortunately, there is another darker side to our global fisheries. Imali, could you perhaps shed a bit of light on the illegal, unregulated, or unreported fishing that takes place across the Indian Ocean, and then specifically in the Sri Lankan context?
Thank you very much, Daniel. So simply, we call illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing is IUU, the simple name. So IUU fishing, not only in the Indian Ocean, but it has been a major issue all around the world's ocean. So if we particularly talk about the situation in the Indian Ocean, IUU fishing has been there for a long period of time, but the issues have been recently surfaced because of the declining of the fishing stocks. If we particularly talk about the Sri Lankan context, now, if you can remember, back in 2070s, we had a fishery ban from the EU, European Union, because of accusing Sri Lankan fishermen doing IUU fishing in the international waters. So even though we have our legislations adopted to address this issue of IUU fishing by the Ministry of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources, at that time, the implementation status was not quite adequate. Therefore, the government had to impose new rules and regulations on addressing IUU fishing. So back in around 2013, the government came up with a new addition of some regulations or amendments to the Fisheries Act to tackle the IUU fishing in the high seas, especially. And also that was enacted using some extraordinary gazettes also. So after that, actually, and also with the banning of EU to purchase Sri Lankan fisheries, fisheries community was kind of stressed out because they needed to address these issues because they couldn't sell their products to the EU, which is still the largest fish market in the world. Therefore, that pressure kind of provided a strength to step up to address this IUU fishing. And as a result of that, now I think the arrest of Sri Lankan fishermen in the international waters has been drastically reduced. But I think we have still a problem, especially in the Gulf of Mannar region, where the Indian fishermen come into our side, trespassing our maritime boundaries and, stealing our fish resources. I think there is still, we do some trade-offs with the Indian government to release their arresting their fishermen, and the Indian government is arresting our fishermen, and then like releasing both sides, like that kind of a diplomatic solutions are there. But I don't know whether it is sustainable. But the current situation is like that. Even though the issue is little bit controlled with this implementation of new regulations, but still IUU fishing is a big issue all around the world, not only in the Indian Ocean.
Yeah, certainly. It does seem that insufficient implementation and compliance is an issue that cuts across pretty much all the marine problems we face, not just with illegal fisheries. I've also heard sometimes of forced labor being an issue in other parts of the world, and also the issue of illegal trade across international borders of marine products, where fishers have been, for example, trading sea cucumbers or shark fins. I would just like to follow up with you quickly again, Imali, since we are on this topic. Is this something that has come to light here in Sri Lanka as well, the forced labor issue or the illegal trade across borders?
Actually, Daniel, illegal trade across borders is quite an issue for Sri Lanka as well, because recently we did a research with, interviewing some fishermen who are doing offshore fishing in Sri Lanka and also in the international waters. And according to their responses, they said that a lot of the activities that are happening in the international waters is gone unnoticed, unreported. Therefore, they said that there are lots of vessels coming to in close with each other and doing illegal trades, and therefore trying to hide the actual catchers. And also not to forget about all the issues that we had for the past couple of years of drug smuggling and illegal weapon smuggling into the country. I think they all are associated with this problem of IUU fishing. So I think we really need to take some solid actions to tackle this problem. Yes.
Yeah, it is certainly, I think, an incredibly large issue, and when you're dealing with other countries, it becomes incredibly complicated, and a lot of diplomatic measures have to be taken into consideration. Yeah, I mean, so we know that fishing activities, whether legal or illegal, of course, impact a lot of species, not just our target species. Ishara mentioned earlier, that a lot of our different fisheries are targeting, for example, the tuna, small pelagics, billfish, species that we are quite familiar with consuming on a regular basis, I would say. But Ishara, could you tell us a bit more about the problems surrounding bycatch, and is this something that we should worry about or not? And if so, how can we reduce such impacts?
Yes, Daniel, that if there is a fishery, I think there is a bycatch. So it's inevitable with the fisheries. We don't intentionally catch, but fishermen, they get different species, unwanted species from their catches. And what they can do, they might keep that fish if they have value, or they might sell, or they might discard them into the ocean if they are prohibited, or if they are regulated under the act. Or maybe there are some ETP species, they might can't retain again, they will discard it. Or maybe they will bring into back to the shore, where they will try to hide with the authorities. So it's everywhere, but that we can reduce the bycatch and we can bring into the sustainable level. That's how we have to manage our fisheries. So if not, we are dealing with the direct catch. Again, we are losing our indirect species or non-targeted species through this food chain or food web, and finally we are losing all the fish resources at the unsustainable level. So to that, we can do, or we can utilize the technical application technology that we are doing with. So there are some technical application in the Indian Ocean as well. They are at the research level, especially for the long lines. They are trying to use or modify the hooks to reduce the bycatch of seabirds and some sort of other species, again reducing the bycatch of the sharks. Then again, they are developing, as the Indian Ocean Tuna Commission and the other interest parties are developing different guidelines to follow different fishermen to release these non-targeted catch or bycatch, especially without harming them or without stressing them. So especially, under the IOTC, they have translated documents for releasing sea turtles, marine mammals, as well as for the endangered ETP species, endangered threatened or protected species. Again, we are doing some awareness programs for the fishermen, how they are important, why you have to release, and different knowledge gaps in the fishermen. So once we giving good awareness, they would do their own way. And what we can do again, we have to put some regulation as we take into the regulation in for shark conservation. Again, for the other species, we can put some regulation, and we can again make awareness of those activities and regulation, and we can reduce the bycatch.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly encouraging to see that some progress is being made. With as you mentioned, with the development of these guides and training programs and all that, and it sounds like it's certainly required considering the scale of this issue. To get back to you, Imali, I would like to find out what your opinion is on the other destructive sides of the fisheries sector. And also, is our current management policy accounting for those problems?
Daniel, I think now when we talk about, because fisheries, it's not confined to a certain area; it's a global resource, right? It's spread all around the world's ocean. So, like in anywhere else in the world, Sri Lanka, we do have this problem of overfishing. Because like when we talk about the overfishing, we talk about the catch declining, and the size of the average size of species who are being caught is declined over the time, and we see that everywhere nowadays. When we go to a fish market, you see the tuna sizes are getting smaller and smaller. Why? Because fishermen, they are catching much more smaller sizes. So I think that issue is there, and also we still have this problem of data shortage. We do not have enough research. I mean, we do have human human resources to do that, but the funding is a problem, and also the technical know-how. We need vessels to go for ocean researchers, so we don't have that kind of resources. So I think that's a big problem. Before we go into much further levels of policy making and everything, of course we do that. We do need that. But first, I think we have to make like a solid database, and then only we can go into an evidence-based decision. To take the decision, we should have enough data. I think that's a major problem for our country, especially the developing countries, lack of data, because otherwise we won't be able to go for much solid decisions to take.
Yeah, that's definitely a lot to take in there. I just wondered, because I actually read a bit about your research, and I see that you have done some work on ghost fishing. And, that's probably not a term that's very familiar to a lot of people. So I wondered if you could perhaps just elaborate a bit more on that, Imali, and also how big an issue you consider that component to be.
Yes, Daniel. Now, Ghostnets are actually nets or any kind of fishing gear that is let loose in the marine environment or an aquatic environment. In other terms, we call it ALDFG, abandoned, lost, or otherwise discarded fishing gear. And another name for that is derelict fishing gear, which fishermen are throwing away for some reasons. It can be for bad weather conditions, or it can be sometimes the gear is damaged and they can no longer use it, or sometimes it might be an illegal fishing gear that they were using and someone is coming and they just wanted to get rid of that. So for different reasons, they just avoid that. They just throw that into the marine, any kind of aquatic, basically for marine environment. And now if we look at the FAO statistics, recent statistics suggest that almost 50% of the marine debris are consisted of this ghost nets or derelict fishing gear. But mostly we talk about, like, all the time we talk about plastics, right? Microplastics and, you know, everything like that. The things that we just drop into the oceans after we use, especially from land-based sources. That is, of course, true. That's a big problem. But that is only half of the question. Now, even though if we came up with a solution to this microplastic, what about the other half of the question? The other half comes from the ghost net. It's still there. So these nets are basically made up of nylon or other kind of non-biodegradable material to give it a more strength, and therefore they might stay there for probably 10s of 15s of 20s of years, and they keep killing non-targeted species such as marine mammals and, you know, seabirds and turtles who are completely, you know, innocent, and they have no economical value, and it keeps, you know, declining marine biodiversity, therefore diminishing the entire quality of the marine environment. I think that should be, you know, properly given consideration, because even if we come up with a solution for this plastic problem, we still have a huge solution, or still have a huge problem to address.
Yeah, thank you for highlighting this issue. I think, you know, in the world that we live in right now with social media and all that, there are lots of messages and opinions being put out there, and it's, you know, not always the right message. And I think this issue of ghost fishing that you highlighted is certainly relevant, because it's not something that many of us knew about. And we have to consider now, you know, that there are the legal fisheries, the illegal fisheries, and ghost fishing on top of that. And as you pointed out previously, you know, the trends in the declining sizes of fish is an indicator that these species are potentially not an unlimited resource as we previously thought. You know, this question is to you, Ishara. I mean, traditionally, fish have been considered a renewable natural resource, and for many centuries have actually been an open access resource. So pretty much anybody could fish them if they wanted to. Is this still the case? Do we still have an open access resource? And if so, how do we ensure that we're not over-harvesting this resource, considering all the other issues, for example, of ghost fishing as well?
Yeah, in the open access nature, we all know that they can access and they can do whatever they want to do, and they can maximize their effort and catch and the profit gain from the particular fishing activities. But I don't think now at the moment we don't have complete open access nature fishery. So we have restricted fisheries activities through the licensing or through the giving some area closure, or maybe giving some restrictions for the
Okay, it seems we have a slight connection issue there, unfortunately. So while we wait to get Ishara back online.
Yeah.
Okay,
Sorry.
Ishara.
Sorry for interruption. So I think that we need to more concern about the nature of fishing. Even we are licensed those fishing activities. Once they go to fish, they will do whatever they want to maximize their catching. So that's one thing I worry about. When they want to do, they will maximize, and it will lead to overexploitation. So without knowing, they won't think that people say, you know, fishermen every time say there is more fish in the ocean. So without having any idea, that they think, okay, I can access, maybe another my person can access, then they can extract more fish than me, so I have to increase my effort. So to giving that idea, we need to again aware these fishermen. So this is not a expandable property. So this is biological property where you will need to restrict or you need to yourself to manage. So then again, thoroughly we need to take place some management strategies to overcome this open access nature. Even we put some restrictions under different regulation. Example, we have lobster management regulation for lobster fishery. Then, there are two closed areas, again, September and February, but fishermen, what they do catch in the closed seasons and they will bring into the cages and retain them. Once they open the fishery, from first day in October, they will try to export those fisheries. So those are the things that we deal with, and we have to aware those fishermen and all the value chain, how to avoid those issues through the different management strategies.
Yeah, that's quite an interesting point that you raised, particularly the example on the lobster fisheries. It goes to show that even despite there being some regulations in place, there are always ways around it, and that's something we have to take into consideration. I mean, this ties in quite well to the next question that I have, which I thought, Imali, perhaps you might want to talk on. Fully protecting certain animals is often used as a management tool, and we touched on this previously, as Ishara mentioned, for heavily depleted species and the endangered, threatened, or protected species. Just as an example, in Sri Lanka, we have about 5 species of sharks that are fully protected. What are your thoughts on this form of management, and is it effective, given that sometimes these species may be dead when they're brought onto the boat?
Daniel, now we know that this kind of policies and regulations, it's well put on place, but the real question is whether they are implemented. Now I can give you some examples. Now probably Ishara would also agree with me. Sometimes we get samples fish samples to our university. And they claim that the police claim that they are being killed using blast fishing. And then when we check the samples, sometimes they are consisted of these protected animals. And this is only just few cases that they are being arrested. Most of the times they are not being arrested, and they just go into the market, and nobody really knows that. Now I have personally seen some, for example, some tambua species in Nigambo fish market. Now it's a protected species. So I mean, if I believe the consumers, they need to be educated. They do not know who are the species that are protected, right? They just go there and look fish for cheaper prices. That is their main objective there. I think there is a big gap in between the regulations and the knowledge level of the consumers. So I think that part needs to be addressed. Otherwise, we can put up a lot of regulations, all these protection plans, but nothing will work if we do not address this gap of knowledge.
Certainly, and I think the consumer awareness is a very good point that you raised. We have heard quite a few potentially depressing aspects of the wild-caught fisheries. Ishara, I was wondering if you could just very briefly maybe give us an example of a good, sustainable wild capture fishery that exists in Sri Lanka. Are you aware of one that you could highlight?
Yeah, actually, Daniel, there are number of studies, stock assessment related to coastal fisheries and then offshore fisheries. At the moment, we are happy to announce that our blue swimming trap, northwestern and Bay of Bengal fisheries are achieve eco-label under the MSC certificate. So I think not MSC certificate, but we achieve eco-labeling process, as it's one of its kind of first eco-labeling certified capture fisheries in Sri Lanka. Again, it's one of the first in the South Asian blue swimming crab achieved that eco-labeling. Then I know that there are some fisheries we can improve to the potential level. Example as Sri Lankan longline fisheries, we can do improve with the knowledge and the technical support from the different parties. So, you know, in the longline fisheries, we had significant bycatch in last decades, but we are trying to reduce by different efficient methods, especially bycatch of the sharks by reducing the wire line that attached to the long line, especially so it will reduce significantly. Again, then we took some measurements to ban some shark species, especially you mentioned 5 shark species. So fishermen are following those things. Then we hope that we can bring up to sustainable level of these fisheries where we have low bycatch and we are doing very environment friendly way. So by doing that, we can bring good income to all through value chain, and we can bring those fishermen very high up in their way of practicing. So no good example, when we follow something, then others will follow. So that's the nature in fishermen. So if we educate, if they get in some advantage from that one, they will definitely follow. We can't say no to that.
Sure. I mean, incentives are always necessary along with any education that takes place. But it's good to hear that there is a bit of hope for the wild capture fisheries and that it's not all doom and gloom. To change tracks now, we often hear that the future of fisheries is in aquaculture, whether it's freshwater or marine aquaculture. And this farming method is used for fish, for lobsters, prawns, even algae like seaweed. Imali, could you perhaps tell us a bit about the history and the experiences of aquaculture in Sri Lanka so far?
Certainly. Now, before we talk about the history of aquaculture in Sri Lanka, which is quite recent, of course, let me just tell you a little bit of the status of aquaculture right now in the global context. Now, we know for last couple of decades, now, global catches have been declined, at least come into a steady state because of this population declining and, all the pollution impacts on the natural fisheries stock. And right now, the global capture fisheries is around 96.4 million metric tons, where aquaculture supplies another 82.4 million tons. So it's basically like around 50% of the total total fisheries production comes from the capture fisheries, and the other 50 comes from aquaculture. So you can see how aquaculture has been developed for the past years in the world, and now it has succeeded the agriculture sector and has become the fastest growing food production sector in the world, which is of course a tremendous thing. Now, when we talk about the history of aquaculture in Sri Lanka, probably because of the cultural background of our country, we don't have much like a long history that goes back decades. It's just like aquaculture started back in late 1970s as a government incentive to promote the fisheries production in the country. So it started first as a polyculture method in seasonal tanks, few seasonal tanks in the dry zone, and then by the years of like mid 80s, government started to provide some further incentives, so more private sector participants were involved in the process. But right now, actually, when we talk about the inland aquaculture, it is basically dominated by species such as tilapia and Indian and Chinese carp. But the majority of the aquaculture production comes from the shrimp production, which was developed early 90s. However, when it comes to the mid-90s years, like 1994, 1995, more and more private owners, they wanted to start this fish farms because of high economic inputs that it can give. So this unlimited or uncontrolled nature of incoming business ventures in the aquaculture sector, it created the situation where it self-polluted the domain, because growing number of aquaculture ponds started to pollute their area, encroach the mangrove areas, the salt marshes, the lagoons. Therefore, the industry came to some sort of a decline. Another reason for that was this diseases such as the yellowhead disease and white spot syndrome that kind of took over the industry. Therefore, even though there was a huge blooming in the aquaculture industry back in mid-90s, when it comes to early 2000, aquaculture was kind of restricted only to a certain area in the north, especially in the northwestern province. So when we call that, just to mention what is the GDP contribution of the aquaculture, it's about 0.2. When the total fisheries contribution to the country's GDP is about 1.5%.
Right. So there is quite a bit of a difference in the aquaculture and the marine wild capture fisheries in Sri Lanka then. Yeah, you raised a few important points there. For example, the fact that aquaculture has been directly linked to the destruction of certain habitats such as mangroves, and as you pointed out, this has been well documented in Sri Lanka. Do you think that there are good examples of aquaculture in Sri Lanka or other countries? And if available in other countries, is this something that Sri Lanka is collaborating to share experiences and technology? Perhaps, Imali, you could speak a bit more on this.
I think in Sri Lanka, the impact of aquaculture, to my knowledge, I think it's well documented. I mean, like, there are lots of student researchers and other, professional researchers. They have done these studies and published about the level of pollution, like that kind of environmental impacts that can be resulted by aquaculture. And I think NAFDA, National Aquaculture Development Agency, is doing a tremendous job in, addressing these issues, training people to deal with, this kind of environmental impacts. I think with their incentives, countries' aquaculture sector is going towards quite a bit of, towards the light. And also it has been helped by, or it has been supported by the recently formulated National Fisheries and Aquaculture Policy, where they provide, necessary provisions for the aquaculture farmers to, sustainably manage their practices. I cannot point out what are the exact, ideal situations of aquaculture where they manage everything, because I don't think they won't exist, because, always we deal with the natural environment. So there will be anyhow some kind of a pollution or some kind of an environmental impact. But I think with all this, emerging knowledge and emerging technologies, also the cooperation that we have been given by other, especially the SAARC countries, I think we are heading towards better future in terms of aquaculture development.
Yeah, that's positive to hear. As I mentioned, it's always great to hear about the positive stories and the fact that there is progress, and that technology is advancing, which in turn benefits both our aquaculture and marine fisheries. Ishara, do you think, given that we are moving towards these sustainable fisheries, what would you say is the primary constraining factor at the moment? Is it technology, or is it capacity, finances, the lack of data? What do you think?
With my experience, I would say first for the capture fisheries, it's data and the research. So as we all know, we have dealing with high diverse seasonal fisheries, especially in the coastal waters. So we are lacking with the stock status, then number of stocks that are available around the country, and the fisheries data for the certain period of time. Those are the gaps that we need to fill through the research. But to fill those gaps, actually we need finance support. That's one thing we lacking behind. So it's one of the main thing that we need to supported by some kind of projects or corporations, and maybe even the different parties like different non-governmental organizations, they can contribute to different fisheries, as most of the non-governmental organizations now you are dealing with different stocks or different endangered species or different fisheries. So they are improving the available research information data available. As I have seen in last week, some of the researchers, they published the fishery on bycatch about the sawfish species in Sri Lanka that was lacked for almost 3 decades for Sri Lanka, and we only had some bit information from the fishers, those who are doing in the coastal waters, and they said in the 2016 they saw one big one, then they saw in the Kalpitia lagoon, then but now they couldn't see likewise. So bit to the fisheries management, so we need to have some data and research. So then way forward we can do stock assessment and we can have a good managed fishery. For the aquaculture, I would say we need to develop technology, especially in the shrimp aquaculture, as Imali mentioned, we are dealing with continuous disease occurrence within the coastal aquaculture. Then to come up with these issues, we need different technologies, especially biotechnology application is very much simple and very much easy to access if we have sufficient money and the sufficient resources. So then again, moving forward with the inland culture-based capture fisheries, it's contributed significantly to the inland capture fisheries, where we do culture in the hatcheries and we bring into the place where we introduce into different reservoirs and we harvest later. So to develop these techniques, we need research and technology again. So now almost all small scale aquaculture or fisheries societies around these reservoirs, they are trying to have mini hatcheries. So where they can produce their own aquaculture species and they can deposit their reservoirs and they can make efficient production from their reservoirs. At the moment, NAGDA has maximized their capacity, but we need more aquaculture production to use maximum utilization of these inland reservoirs in the country. So if you have seen the trend of the inland aquaculture fisheries, it's very progressive and it's showing very progressive trend over the last 2 decades. So we need to improve the technology and we need to disseminate those technology to these aquaculture sector, especially when we consider about the inland, both coastal aquaculture.
That was very comprehensive and certainly covered all the different components that I was wondering about. So thank you so much. I would actually like to take one of the audience questions now. Something that has been flagged up, and we discussed this previously, the issues of implementation and compliance. And it's clear that imposing rules is not sufficient. So what else are we trying to do in order to ensure that Sri Lanka is not overfishing, and also to ensure that the fishers are aware of why they shouldn't be overfishing? This is an open question. If either of you would like to give it, perhaps Imali, we can start with you.
Yes, Daniel. Yeah, certainly, that's true. To add something to it, I think it's important to formulate these rules and regulations and implement that, but equally it is important to educate the fishermen who are actually the real resource owners. Now, when we do research or like when we talk to these people, fishermen who are going out to the sea and do their business, they're actually very much willing to learn. they are willing to participate into, like training programs and capacity development programs. They are very much willing. But the thing is that they do have some other social issues, like they don't have enough time to do that because they have to go do their job. Otherwise, their family will be hungry. So that kind of social issues are, I think, rendering their efforts to, contribute to the concept of sustainable fisheries. But I think awareness generation of the people who are actual resource owners, the fishermen, is equally important as much as implementations of rules and regulations.
That's very helpful to hear. Ishara, there's a question that I think you might be able to shed a bit of light on. Do you think for a coastal nation like Sri Lanka, would it be profitable to engage in fisheries, or should we be looking at alternatives? For example, marine-based recreational activities such as scuba diving, or ecotourism, or other ecotourism opportunities. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think, Daniel, that for the first part of the question, I think that for the developing nations and the coastal nation, fisheries is must. As we know, it's provide almost 3 millions of direct and indirect opportunities or livelihood opportunities. Again, it's create significant contribution to the Sri Lankan GDP. It's around 1.2 or 1.3 at the 2019. And also, I believe that we can manage at this sustainable level if we take action at this time. So if we look into the both marine coastal fisheries and the offshore fisheries, we are at the peak. So we are at the plateau when we look into the yellowfin tuna, except other skipjack tuna, almost all tunas are at the peak. Then when we talk about the coastal fisheries, all are at the peak or overexploited state or maximum sustainable level. So we have other opportunities as well. So what we can do, one thing, we have to diversify the fishermen's activities. So maybe they can bring into the other activities like tourism, or maybe seaweed farming, or related culture-based capture fisheries, or culture-based capture fisheries, or maybe other culture activities along the coastal line. Or again, we have to strengthen with them for their finance management. That's one thing that I want to mention here, because most of the fishermen, they are well enough, they are having enough income to sustain their family, but the thing is they are lacking of the financial ability to manage their income. So what we propose, especially yesterday also I had discussion with the Department of Fisheries, we have to bring the finance management to these fishermen's group, especially small scale fishermen, and awareness where we can sustainable our fishery resources by diversifying and by awareness.
Yeah, it's quite interesting to hear how many different components one has to take into consideration when one is dealing with, the potential sustainability of a fishery. And, it's not as easy as we sometimes think, just to implement or just to introduce a regulation and that everything sorts itself out. But I think on this note that you highlighted on sustainable fisheries, I think this will be a good way to wrap up our session. And I'd like to ask you, Imali, just a final quick question. Since it appears that sustainable fisheries is probably the way forward, in many other countries we have heard of these sustainable fishery labels. Is there such a scheme in Sri Lanka, and how can we as individuals help contribute towards the sustainable fisheries movement?
I think, as Ishara mentioned in his previous talk, the concept of eco-labeling or sustainable labeling is actually limited to the export fisheries in Sri Lanka, because it's really quite impossible to implement that kind of scheme to the local fisheries, because we cannot really make a traceability. We don't know how fish, if we go to a fish market, we don't know how it was caught, where it was caught. All this information is missing. I think this traceability, if we provide a mechanism to get this traceability, and then probably we will be able to at least, start up the concept of sustainable labels into fisheries products, because they are available in other products like other agricultural products, but not in local fisheries. That is one thing. And when the other thing I want to say is, when we talk about sustainability as a whole concept, it's not only about environmental sustainability. I completely agree with what Ishara said, mentioned just before, like we have to provide people who are engaged in fisheries with some knowledge, financial management, everything, because we have to care for this societal component of fisheries, because it's about environmental sustainability, economic sustainability, and also social sustainability. So if we are to move towards sustainable fisheries, we have to think of all these components together. While we are taking care of the environment, we have to make sure that the people who are engaged in fisheries are treated equally. Their livelihoods are secured. They are paid enough wage. Their human rights are conserved. So that kind of special concern to be given to the society as a whole, if we are to proceed with concept of sustainable fisheries.
Thank you, and I think that's a great way to really wrap up this session. We have discussed a lot of different points and highlighted the complexities of this topic, and we could probably go on for hours, but unfortunately our time is now over. I would like to thank all the audience questions that came in, and I would also like to thank our exclusive patron, the EU delegation in Sri Lanka, the summit patrons, Gilmar Conservation and Keels, and supporting patron Plastic Cycle. I hope you have enjoyed and learned more about the future of fisheries and aquaculture. Please do stay tuned for the rest of the summit, as we intend to talk a lot more about our oceans. Our next session will actually be on the logistical hubs and security in the Indian Ocean, and this will be starting at 5:45 p.m. In around 15 minutes time. A big thank you once again to Imali Manikarachchi and Ishara Rathnasuriya for joining in today's session. Thank you for your time, and I wish all of you and the expert panelists a very good day ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much.